using the help system. I always tell everybody, if you're not willing to read the help, you will not succeed at PowerShell, and it's true. So using the help system is probably one of the most important things you can learn to do in PowerShell. That's why we're covering it so early. Here's what we're going to cover. I don't want this to seem too much like kindergarten, but well, we're starting from the beginning with PowerShell, and the help system really is one of its most important tools. You know, one of the toughest things about learning any new technology is figuring out just what you can do, and in the case of a command line, what the command is. And so the help system provides a way to discover commands so that you can find your tools. In version 3, it's also updatable, meaning there's a way to download the most up-to-date help. So as Microsoft finds errors or whatever else, they can get them fixed for you. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about how to interpret the help, how to read the help, how to make sense of its own unique syntax. And I'm going to point out a second type of help, not just for commands, but the about topics, or if you're from Canada, the about topics, that really act as PowerShell's operator manual. And because you can never have too much help, I'm going to show you how to access the online versions of the help and give you an idea why you might want to do that. Okay, so one of the things Microsoft had to deal with from the prior version of PowerShell is how to distribute the help files. In PowerShell version 1 and 2, the help files just came with PowerShell. They were written right to the disk. The problem is that in between the time that they have to stop working on the help files and ship them off to get translated into 11 dozen different languages, the coders for the product are still making changes. And that means the help files often go out with the usual, the typos and errors, things you would expect from human beings, but they also go out wrong because the code changed in between. I spent a lot of money shipping bad help files, but because those files shipped with Windows or shipped with the PowerShell update, they had no way to push updates out. I mean, you can't load updates for help files into Windows Update. It's just not critical enough. Nobody wants to wake up on Patch Tuesday and download 50 megabytes of updated help files. So the result is they wound up never updating them at all. PowerShell version 3, they decided to make a change. They're not shipping any help with the product at all. So one of the first things you're going to do when you get PowerShell on a new machine, not on your servers, you don't necessarily need the help there, although you might want to update it there, but the first thing you're going to do is run update help. Now this is going to take a few minutes. It's going to scan through every single module and extension I have installed on my computer. It's going to go out to the internet to the location designated by those modules. Now all my modules are made by Microsoft, so it's going to go to Microsoft's website, look for updated help, and download them. You can run this command as often as you want to. It will not actually do anything any more frequently than once every 24 hours. So it's perfectly fine to run this 10 times a day if you want to. It's only going to run the first time, every 24 hours. If you need it to run more frequently, you run update help space minus force, and that forces it to run right then. It resets your 24-hour clock too. So as you can see, it's downloading all this cool stuff, doing them alphabetically, so we're into the S's, so we're past the halfway point. That's good. Off to the T's. We may get some errors because I still have some pre-release modules. Yeah, and so some of these pre-release modules, the help hasn't yet been posted. So that's why I'm getting these error messages. That's totally to be expected, and I'm totally okay with it. Now, what if you've got machines that do not have an internet connection, or they're firewalled off and they can't get out to the internet? No problem. There's another command called save help. Here's what this does. This will download the help and save it to a file. So you run this on a machine that is connected to the intertubes, take those files, stick them on a file share or a USB drive, and sneaker net them to whatever non-connected server you're trying to update, and then you run update help with its source path parameter. So you point it at those downloaded files, and it will update the local help from that source. So they've thought about all this. And this is the way it's going to go. This is not going to go through Windows Update or anything else. This is how you're going to have to do it. There is something in PowerShell called a profile script, and we will talk about them in the very last nugget in this series. You could put update help right into your profile script. and that will make it run automatically every time you open the shell. And of course, if it runs more than once every 24 hours, it'll just bail and it won't do anything. But that would make you always have an updated copy. So a couple other things before we really talk about interpreting the help. I want to make sure that as you're looking at help, so you run help, type the command you want to get help for, please get in the habit of typing -full. Because this not only, let's scroll all the way up to the top here, this not only gives you the brief syntax breakdown, which I'm going to show you how to interpret, it gives you a description for what the command does. It breaks down every single parameter, explains what that parameter does, whether it's mandatory, whether it's positional. I'll explain what all that means. After all that, it gives you some notes, just interesting little tidbits, and then it gives you examples. Example 1, there's example 2, lots of different examples on how to actually use the thing. Because the bottom line is, most folks, I think, spend more time operating PowerShell in Google, meaning they're not really using PowerShell. They're in a search engine looking for examples of how to use PowerShell. You don't need to do that. You can just get them right here. In fact, let's get that command back. -example instead of full will just take you straight to the examples. So there's example 7 at the very bottom of the list. If you're in the console, the help acts slightly different. Help, let's do that same one. Update help -full. In the console window, this internally pipes to more, which you can see at the bottom of the screen there, and then I can space bar my way through one page at a time, or enter my way through one line at a time, or Control-C my way back to the prompt. That doesn't do that in the ISE. In the ISE, it just scrolls by real fast, and then you can use the scroll bar to go back up to it. A couple of other options for viewing help. I find that I typically want to look at the help as I'm typing the command. So I can kind of refer to the syntax, see what I'm supposed to type, and then immediately type it. So on my main machine, I've got 2 monitors. Hopefully you do too. So you can do this. -show window. That pops the help up in a separate window, which you can then float over to another computer or another screen and be able to read as you're typing it. And you can boost up the font size. You can do a little find. You know, if you got in here and you're thinking, what was that 24-hour period he was talking about? Well, let's just search for 24 until we see that. It says no matches found. So maybe it's hour. And it'll actually do the little highlighting. You can see there's the little highlighting. So again, useful trick. Last useful trick for the help. As Microsoft updates the help and they make it available to download, they also update it online. This will pop up your default web browser. So let's resize this a bit. So again, you can float this off to a different screen so you can look at the nice, prettily formatted version. This will tell you when the most recent update was. This is still pre-release that I'm looking at, so that's kind of cool. Breaks down, and it's formatted nicer, right? Command names are in boldface. It's got some indentation, some tables to lay things out. It's just a little prettier. All your examples and everything are still here. And at the very bottom, there's a place for community content. So you or other members of the community can sign in with your Microsoft.NET Hotmail Live Passport ID, whatever we're calling it these days, and you can add examples or offer corrections and things like that. So really, really cool. Plus, another thing I like about this view is over here on the left-hand side, it's got a listing of all the commands. So you can quickly browse to other commands. And it breaks them down by module, so whatever module they're in. We're in Microsoft PowerShell Core. And you can quickly get to whatever and browse and see what other commands are available. So I think that's pretty neat stuff. Okay, the big way in which you are going to use the help system, one of the big ways, is to actually discover what commands are available. So let's think for a second. Let's say I'm on a new server and I need to configure its network settings. That's something standard. You have to take it off DHCP, which is the default. So help star network star. The help command accepts wildcards, These are one of the most useful things you can use. Look, in a GUI, I want you to imagine that you've just gotten a brand new graphical user interface for the first time, maybe Server Manager. What do? Well, you click on menus and you see what's there. Huh, okay, that's what I can do. That's what the manage menu has. All right. You hover over things. See what they do. You click on things that expand into tree views and so forth. Oh, all right, that's what all that does. Okay, interesting. You can non-destructively browse or discover what the tool can do for you. It's called discoverability. It's one of the reasons that GUIs are so easy to learn, because in large part, everything you can do is right there in front of you. It's displayed for you. Here, not so much. Although the GUI here has got some toolbars I can hover over to find out what they do, I can't do any of that with any of these commands. So using wildcards with the help command is your discoverability tool. This is how you will find what you can do. Now, this is not Google, right? You're not going to go help network adapter IP. That's not going to work. That actually comes through as 3 separate sets of parameters, and the help command is going to have no idea what to do with them. Give it one word. In fact, I recommend you give it a shorter word. Instead of network, just give it net. Go with the shortest possible keyword that you think is going to get you to the command or functionality that you're after. Hit enter. Wow, okay, I got a lot of results there. Probably too many for me to scroll through, but the thing is, at this level, I'm just going to take kind of a high level look at this. What am I potentially dealing with? I've got, let's look at the top of this and I'll show you. You've got all these modules. Okay, well, I know setting the IP address has got nothing to do with Active Directory, so that's out. Nothing to do with that, or that. Net adapter, maybe. So I'm going to scroll through those hits. Net adapter binding, maybe that would do something good. So I've got some possibilities there. Network connection, that might be something to look at. Net security is probably not going to be it, so I can skip all those. Net TCP/IP, get net IP address. Okay, that's probably a command that will have something to do with what I'm after. So now I can say help get net IP address, hitting tab to complete that command name, and that will get me the help for that command. So it's actually loading it up right now. So there it is. Bing. The neat thing about this is the see also list at the end. There's a set net IP address. That sounds more like actually making a change. Help set net IP address. Great. This is probably what I want. So now I can read the syntax. I can now come back to it and look at examples to see how to use this thing. That's how the help command helps you find stuff. Really, really get used to doing that. The better you can be at finding things using the help command, the better you will be at PowerShell, because trust me, there's something like 2,000, 3,000 commands that come with this thing before you start adding, all of the product-specific extensions for things like Exchange and SharePoint and so forth. In a fully blown out environment where you've got a lot of Microsoft products that are PowerShell integrated, you will have thousands of commands to wade through. The help command is going to help you narrow those down and find the command that does whatever it is you are trying to accomplish. The help files also act as PowerShell's, its user manual. There's a bunch of help topics that start with the word about. There they are. These are all just help files. Now, these will show up in a normal wildcard search. So if I were to say help log, L-O-G, I get a bunch of hits for commands or commandlets that include the word log. There are some functions that include the word log, and there are some help files about event logs and about, logical operators. Okay, that's got the word log in it. That's fair. Let's say I was, I'm interested. Let's read about event logs. Okay, help about event, and this will tab complete. And these are just really literally text files, and they explain background information. There's nothing in particular about a specific command here. This is ways to get to different event logs, how to manage event logs. Windows PowerShell creates a Windows event log that's named Windows PowerShell to record Windows PowerShell events. I had no idea. So don't forget about those about files. Those are always useful to read, and those will work with the Dash Online, the Dash Show window. These get updated when you run update help. They're part of the help system, so definitely be sure to take advantage of them. Now we should talk about interpreting the actual real help file. So let's just start with a simple one. Help get service. Scroll up to the top. We're going to be talking about this syntax section. So what I'm looking at right now is a syntax section that has got 3 parameter sets. 1, 2, and 3. These parameter sets represent 3 different ways that I could choose to run this command. You're going to notice that these parameter sets have a lot in common. They all have a computer name parameter. They all have dependent services. They all have exclude and include, right? The majority of them are identical. There will always be at least one difference between parameter sets. This parameter set has a name parameter. None of the others do. This parameter set has an input object parameter. None of the other ones do. This second one has a display name parameter, and none of the other ones do. So there's always a difference between the parameter sets, some difference of some kind. It might be hard to see. Here's a good example of hard to see. Let's see here. I want invoke command. Syntax is a little bit more complicated on this one. Lots of parameter sets to choose from. And actually looking at one of these and figuring out which is the unique bit can be tricky. Because they don't always list in the exact same order. For example, I don't think this parameter set has a computer name parameter, but this one does. So here's the deal. Once you have selected one of these unique parameters, you are trapped in that parameter set. For example, let's say I decided that for whatever I was doing, I needed to run invoke command with minus computer name. Right there, that's going to eliminate this parameter set and this parameter set. This one has a computer name. So now I can't use any parameters that only existed here or here. I'm stuck using the ones that have a computer name. So once you sort of lock yourself into a parameter set, you have to stick with that parameter set. So scrolling down a bit, I can see I've got 2 parameter sets that use a minus computer name switch. So if I'm going to use that, I'm going to be locked into one of these 2. And there's probably some difference between these as well, and they can get hard to see. Typically, you're just going to have to sort of take a look at this thing and see if it does what you want. Right now, they look real similar to me, but I know there's something in there that's different between them. So you can't mix and match, though. So if, let's see, this parameter set has a job name. This one does too, so that's not a good example. Let's get rid of that then. Input object, throttle limit, common parameters, minus session. There we go. Yeah, this has a session parameter. This one does not. So I cannot use minus computer name and minus session together because they exist in different parameter sets. You can't mix and match across parameter sets. That's the moral of the story. So let's go back to a slightly simpler time. Help get service. I'll tell you what some of this syntaxage stuff means. First of all, anything in square brackets is optional. Oops, that's not what I meant right there. This is entirely within square brackets, so I can run this command without using minus exclude. I don't have to do minus include because that's in square brackets. I don't have to do that. I don't have to use that. Don't have to use that, and I don't have to use that. Well, look, I just crossed them all out. Yeah, you can run get service all by itself with no parameters and it will return all of the services because all of those parameters were optional. Once you start looking at individual parameters, the things in angle brackets are data types. So switch parameter means you don't provide a value here. You just type minus required services or you don't type it, but there's no value passed to it. If you're going to use minus exclude, it takes a string. And the two square brackets jammed right up against one another means it takes multiple strings. So let's see, how would you do that? Here's the easy way. I'm going to show you a lot of different ways that you could potentially specify multiple values for a parameter that accepts multiple values. Here's one way. Get service minus computer name, and I'll just pop in localhost. A comma separated list is always taken by PowerShell to be an array or multiple values. And so a comma separated list can always be passed to any parameter that is capable of accepting multiple values. So there you go. Let's go back to the help. The other major thing here to pay attention to is you're going to see some parameters like this one, where you've got the overall parameter in square brackets and the parameter's name minus name is in a separate set of square brackets all on its own. That means this is a positional parameter. Now, looking at this help, this is in the first position. This is the second position, but you'll notice that the computer name parameter name is not in square brackets. So I can't use this positionally. The fact that it's in position 2 doesn't actually matter. In fact, none of the rest of these are like that. So the only positional one is the first position. Here's how you would use that if you needed to. So get service minus name win RM. Get service win RM. Because the minus name parameter is positional, if I don't use a parameter name, like I didn't do here, and I simply provide a value, that value, which is in the first position, will go with whatever parameter is coded for the first position, which in this case is minus name. PowerShell can tell the difference between parameter names and their values based on the hyphen, right? So this little dash has to go in the front of a parameter name, and then you get a space, and then what follows is that parameter's values. Here, nothing started with a dash. Therefore, I did not type a parameter name. I simply typed a value. It is in the first position, and so it will be fed to whatever parameter is in the first position, which just happens to be name. You can see that more clearly in the full help, which is why I like to use that. So help get service minus full. And if we scroll up to the help on just the name parameter, there it is, you can see that it is in position 1. Parameters which are not positional will say named. For those, you have to type the parameter name, minus computer name, for example. Get service. This is why we should be using tab completion. Minus name, winrm, minus computer name, localhost. It would be equally legal to say get service, winrm, minus computer name, localhost. That first winrm, that first value, is showing up in purple because it does not start with a dash, and so it is being taken as a value that's being fed to the first position. This is not legal. Minus computer name was a named parameter. If I'm going to use it, I have to type the parameter name, which always starts with a dash. And if you've done it correctly in the ISE, it'll show up color-coded like this, which is one reason I like using the ISE. Of course, the color coding goes away once you hit enter, so you have to pay attention to it before you hit enter. Here's a really common mistake people will make on these things. That's not it. If you look at the help file for this, there is no parameter named winrm. What you probably meant was minus name winrm, and what you probably meant was minus computer name localhost. You're never going to give a value that starts with a dash. And that's a little gotcha or a common point of confusion that I will bring up again as we start running more commands. But when in doubt, here's a simple thing to remember. If you've put a dash in front of it, it needs to show up help. If you've put a dash in front of it, it had better show up in this list of parameters up here. Dash computer name. If you don't see it listed here with a dash in front of it, then you'd better not be typing it with a dash in front of it. So I will give you a little tip, and this is something, again, that I'll also bring up later because it's worth mentioning. As you're learning PowerShell, try to avoid this syntax. For now, type all of your parameter names. That way you can get in the habit of seeing them in front of you, and then you can start taking shortcuts later once you get to be a little bit more experienced with it. And there's other shortcuts you could be taking too. So I'll bring those up several times as we progress through this. Let's take one last look at this help file and make sure, see what happens when you mistype something? It said, you know, I couldn't find anything that looked like get servus, and so I'm going to go see, nope, I couldn't find anything. It was actually doing a full text search through all of the help descriptions as well. So the help system is useful, so long as you can type. All right, let's make sure I got everything else that needs to be gotten here. Talked about optional. We talked about, you know what, let me show you a mandatory parameter. There's one on event log. You see log name? Notice how the parameter name is in square brackets, indicating that it is a positional parameter, but the overall parameter is not in square brackets, meaning it is mandatory, and that's how you can tell that from here. Once again, if you had taken the time to just add a minus full, I'll scroll back up to that log name parameter, list log name, there it is. Required, true, position 1. So all of that information is detailed and broken out there for you. You don't have to guess at it. That little syntax reminder section of the help file gives you a quick visual cue, but there are a lot of symbols you have to remember the purpose of. The full help will always break it down for you and explain it pretty clearly. So that's pretty much everything you need to know about the help system. How to use it to discover commands, how to update the help, how to read the help, and that is a big part of being able to use PowerShell effectively. Don't forget about those about topics, the things that kind of act as PowerShell's user manual, and don't forget about online help. Even if you're just using it to pop open the help in a more nicely formatted way in a separate window that you can float to another screen. It's a very useful feature. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.